I did not realize my life was already being watched until the morning I climbed a chair to change a smoke detector battery and felt something that should not have been there. I was 68 years old, living alone on a quiet stretch of farmland outside a small rural town where nothing ever happened unless you counted weather and crops as drama. My nearest neighbor lived half a mile away. At night, the only sounds were wind moving through dry grass and the low hum of insects. It was the kind of place people imagined was safe by default, simply because it was far from everything. That Saturday morning began like dozens before it. Every 6 months, without fail, I checked the smoke detectors, tested the alarms, and replaced the batteries. It was not about safety anymore. It was habit. My late wife, Margaret, started the routine more than 30 years earlier when we first moved into the house. She believed small routines were how you protected a family. She had been gone for 5 years, but the habit remained. It was one of the few things that made the house feel less empty. I was standing on a chair in the hallway, twisting the smoke detector loose, when I noticed the weight was wrong. It was heavier than it should have been. Not dramatically so, but enough that my hands paused. Enough that something in my chest tightened before my mind caught up. I opened the casing and looked inside. At first, my brain refused to name what I was seeing. A small black cylinder tucked neatly beside the battery compartment, perfectly fitted, clean, deliberate. There was a tiny lens facing outward through a hole that had been drilled into the plastic housing with surgical precision. A camera. For a long moment, I did not breathe. I stayed balanced on that chair, staring at it, my fingers numb around the plastic shell. My heart did not race. It slowed. That scared me more than panic would have. This was not a cheap novelty device. It was not something bought on impulse. I had spent most of my working life as a compliance auditor, tracing irregularities and hidden patterns for large organizations. I knew what professional surveillance equipment looked like. This was expensive, purpose-built, installed by someone who knew exactly what they were doing. And it was pointed straight toward my bedroom door. Someone had been watching me sleep. I climbed down carefully, sat at the kitchen table, and placed the smoke detector in front of me as if it were evidence from a crime scene. Because that was exactly what it was. The house was suddenly very quiet. The walls felt closer than they ever had before. I asked myself the questions I had taught younger investigators to ask. Who benefits? Who had access? Who had opportunity? The list was short. A repair technician had been through the house months earlier, but never upstairs. My neighbor barely knew how to operate his television remote. Friends did not visit often anymore. My grandson had been here once during a school break, but he was more interested in my old truck than my ceiling fixtures. And then there was my daughter. Claire had moved back to the area 3 months earlier after years away. She said she wanted to be closer, said she worried about me living alone at my age. She came by every week, sometimes twice. She brought food, organized my mail, cleaned without being asked. I had told myself I was lucky. I stared at the smoke detector and felt something inside me resist the conclusion forming in my mind. No, that was absurd. Claire was my child. I had raised her, loved her, protected her. She would not spy on her own father. But another part of me was already working through details I had ignored. The way she asked about my medications, the way she wanted to know which doctor I saw, her casual questions about my finances, her sudden interest in whether I had updated my will. I had brushed it off. Concern, I told myself, that was what good daughters did. I sat there for nearly an hour before making a decision. I would not remove the camera. I would not confront anyone. I would say nothing. If someone was watching me, I would let them keep watching. I would give them what they expected to see. An aging man, alone, slightly forgetful, harmless. I would do what I had done my entire career. When something felt wrong, But proof was missing. I would observe. I would document. I would wait. I put the smoke detector back exactly where it had been, tightened the screws, and stepped down from the chair. Then I looked up at the ceiling and felt the strangest calm settle over me. Whatever was happening in my house, whatever plan had been set in motion, had just become a two-way arrangement. They thought they were watching me. They did not yet realize I was watching them too. The first rule of surviving something you do not yet understand is to change nothing too quickly. So when Claire came by the next afternoon, I greeted her the same way I always did. I smiled. I thanked her for the groceries. I let her kiss my cheek and fuss over whether I had eaten enough. If she noticed anything different in me, she did not show it. Or perhaps she did, and I simply could not tell anymore. She moved through my house with ease, opening cabinets, straightening papers, checking the refrigerator as if it belonged to her. I had once found comfort in that familiarity. Now I watched every step she took. "You look tired, Dad," she said, setting a bag of fruit on the counter. "Are you sleeping well?" "Fine," I answered. "Same as always." She studied my face a moment longer than necessary. Her eyes flicked briefly toward the hallway ceiling before she smiled again. "Good. You know how important rest is at your age." At your age. The words landed differently than they ever had before. Claire sat at the table and began sorting my mail into neat piles. Bills, flyers, a bank envelope that had already been opened. "Did you read this one?" she asked, tapping the envelope lightly. I nodded. Of course. She hesitated, just a fraction of a second, barely visible if you were not looking for it. "I worry about you keeping track of all this," she said gently. "There are so many scams these days. People take advantage of older folks." "Older folks?" I forced a chuckle. "I managed just fine before you were born." She smiled, but the smile did not reach her eyes. I told myself not to jump to conclusions. That was how innocent people got hurt. But as the afternoon went on, the questions kept coming. Not direct questions, casual ones, slipped into conversation like loose threads. Had I taken my medication that morning? Did I still see the same doctor? Did I ever feel confused when I woke up? Did I remember where I kept important documents? Each question was reasonable on its own. Together, they formed a pattern that made my chest feel tight. Her husband, Daniel, arrived shortly after. He greeted me politely, shook my hand, and commented on the weather. He always did. Daniel was quiet, observant, the kind of man who listened more than he spoke. During dinner, he asked about the land. "Have you heard what properties are going for lately?" he said casually. "Even smaller parcels are selling fast." I shrugged. "Prices come and go." "Sure," he said. "But this land has been in the family a long time. You must have plans." "Not plans," I said. "Just time." He nodded slowly, as if filing the response away for later. As they talked, I remembered moments I had dismissed before. Claire asking if I had ever considered downsizing. Claire suggesting it might be safer if someone helped manage my finances. Claire offering to set things up so I would not have to worry anymore. At the time, it had sounded like care. Now it sounded like preparation. After dinner, Claire stood and stretched. "I should check your alarms while I am here," she said lightly, "just to be safe." "I checked them yesterday," I replied. Her eyes widened for a split second before she recovered. "Oh, good. That is good." She did not look relieved. She looked unsettled. When they left, Claire hugged me longer than usual. Her arms tightened around my shoulders as if she were holding something in place. "I love you, Dad," she whispered. "I just want what is best for you." I stood there long after their car disappeared down the road, listening to the gravel settle back into silence. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, I knew the camera was there. I could almost feel its presence like a weight pressing down on my chest. I made sure to turn slowly when I moved. I yawned exaggeratedly. I let my hands shake when I reached for the lamp. If someone was watching, I wanted them to see exactly what they expected. The next few days blurred together. Claire called more often, sometimes twice a day. She asked the same questions in slightly different ways. Each time, I answered a little less clearly, a little more uncertain. "Which doctor did you see again, Dad?" "Oh, the one in town." "Which one?" "I forget the name." There was a pause on the line, a quiet satisfaction she tried to hide. "Good," she said softly. "That is okay. I am here." I began writing things down, not where she could find them, not on my desk. I used scraps of paper hidden in places no one would think to check, inside an old toolbox, behind a loose board in the shed. Every question, every visit, every odd glance toward the ceiling. The house felt different now, smaller, sharper. Every sound carried meaning. Every interaction felt rehearsed, even when it was not. The hardest part was pretending nothing was wrong. Because some nights, alone in the dark, I wondered if I was wrong. If grief and age had finally begun to play tricks on me. If this was how people lost trust in the world. Then I would remember the weight of that smoke detector in my hands. And I knew. Whatever Claire was doing, whatever Daniel was helping her with, it was not about caring for me. It was about control. And they were not finished yet. Once you realize your home is no longer private, you begin to see it differently. Every room becomes a question. Every object becomes a possibility. I started noticing small things that had always been there but had never demanded attention before. A clock that seemed newer than I remembered. A light fixture that sat at a slightly wrong angle. A faint hum at night that disappeared the moment I stood up. I did not search right away. I waited. Whoever had installed that camera in the hallway had done so carefully. Rushing would only teach them that I was onto something. Instead, I watched patterns. I paid attention to when Claire visited and what she touched. I listened for sounds that did not belong to an old house settling. 3 nights after the discovery, I stood alone in the living room, pretending to read while the television murmured to itself. My eyes kept drifting to the ceiling fan. It was newer than the rest of the fixtures. Claire had insisted on replacing it last month, said the old one was a fire hazard. I fetched a step stool and climbed up slowly, my joints protesting loudly enough to sell the performance. When I twisted the glass cover loose, my stomach dropped. Another camera. Smaller than the first, better concealed. The lens sat behind tinted glass, nearly invisible unless you knew where to look. It faced the couch directly, faced me. I replaced the cover and stepped down, my legs trembling for reasons that had nothing to do with age. That night, I barely slept. Not because I was afraid of being watched, but because I was afraid of how thorough this was becoming. The next day, while Claire was at work, I checked the kitchen. The wall clock over the sink had stopped ticking weeks ago. I had meant to replace the batteries. I had forgotten. Or maybe I had been encouraged to forget. Inside the clock casing was a third device, this one angled toward the counter and table, the place where mail was opened, where paperwork was sorted, where I sometimes laid out documents when I thought no one was around. By the time I found the fourth camera in my study, I was no longer surprised. It sat inside a decorative desk lamp Claire had given me for my birthday. The lens pointed directly at the drawer where I kept old files and handwritten notes. The drawer my wife had insisted was important. The drawer Claire had once cleaned for me when she said it was getting cluttered. I sat down heavily in my chair and stared at the wall. My house was not a home anymore. It was a monitored space, a controlled environment. I was the subject of an experiment I had not agreed to participate in. That evening, Claire arrived unannounced. I was in the kitchen, moving slower than usual on purpose. I let my hands fumble with a glass. I let my voice trail off mid-sentence. "Dad," she said gently, stepping closer, "are you all right?" "I think so," I replied. "Or maybe I already ate dinner. I cannot remember." Her face tightened for just a moment, then softened into something that looked like concern, something that might have fooled me before. She glanced toward the clock on the wall. Just a glance, but it was enough. "You should sit," she said. "I worry when you forget things like that." I smiled weakly and lowered myself into a chair. She began talking, filling the space with reassurance, explaining how stress and loneliness could affect memory, how common it was, how nothing needed to change yet. Yet, as she spoke, she asked a question that froze me in place. "Did you sleep in the bedroom last night, or did you nap on the couch again?" I looked at her, truly looked. I had not mentioned sleeping on the couch to anyone, not once. I had done it quietly after a restless night, staring at the hallway ceiling, aware of the lens watching me from above. I laughed softly, the way confused people do when they do not want to admit they are lost. "The bedroom," I said. "Of course." She nodded, satisfied. In that moment, the last piece clicked into place. They were not just watching me. They were reviewing me, tracking habits, monitoring deviations, building a narrative, one that could be used later, one that painted me as unreliable, forgetful, unfit to manage my own life. After Claire left, I walked through the house slowly, past the hidden lenses, past the furniture that no longer felt neutral, past the walls that had listened to everything. I realized then that this was not about curiosity or fear. It was about preparation. And whatever they were preparing for required proof that I could no longer be trusted with myself. If you want to understand motive, you stop looking at people and start looking at numbers. I had avoided my finances for months, not because I was careless, but because routine had always protected me. Bills were paid on time. Statements arrived by mail. Nothing had ever gone missing before. That reliability was exactly what made the next step so unsettling. I did not use my computer at home. If cameras were watching my movements, there was no reason to believe my devices were untouched. I drove into town instead, parked 2 streets away from the public library, and walked the rest of the distance as if I were simply stretching my legs. Inside, surrounded by students and retirees flipping newspapers, I logged into my account. At first, everything looked normal. The familiar interface, the same account names. I almost convinced myself that I had imagined the rest. Then I checked the balance. The number was wrong. Not slightly wrong. Not the kind of discrepancy you could blame on a delayed payment or a forgotten withdrawal. It was wrong in a way that hollowed out your chest before your mind caught up. I should have had a little over 300,000 set aside. Instead, there was barely half of that left. I refreshed the page, logged out, logged back in. The number did not change. I clicked into the transaction history, my fingers steady even as my pulse climbed. The withdrawals had been spaced carefully, spread over weeks, never large enough to trigger an automatic alert. Each one carried the same reference line, Northgate Advisory Group. The name sounded respectable, conservative, exactly the kind of firm someone would trust without thinking too hard. I knew better than to trust names. I searched for it. Nothing came up. No registered office, no licensing records, no professional filings, just a digital absence where a company should have been, a shell so thin it barely existed. I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes. The cameras were not just about watching me, they were about learning me, my habits, where I kept information, how I accessed my accounts, how often I checked them. I thought about the lamp in my study, the drawer beneath it, The handwritten notes my wife insisted we keep, just in case something happened. Password reminders disguised as grocery lists. Account numbers written in her careful script. I felt sick. Someone had not broken into my accounts. They had been invited in by proximity, by trust, by time. I printed the transaction history and tucked the papers inside a library book before returning it to the shelf. Old habits from a former life died hard. You never carried sensitive documents openly if you could help it. Back in my truck, I sat for a long time without starting the engine. Money could be replaced. Land could be fought for. But the precision of what I was seeing told me something far worse. This was not panic theft. This was not desperation. This was planning. Over the next week, I dug deeper, carefully, and quietly. I used different locations, different computers. I traced the withdrawals to intermediary accounts, then watched them disappear and reappear elsewhere. Each move was designed to muddy the trail just enough to discourage casual scrutiny. But the pattern was unmistakable. The money did not stay gone. It cycled back into a numbered holding account, into escrow, into deposits associated with property transactions. Land transactions. My land. I recognized the parcel numbers immediately. You do not live on a piece of ground your entire adult life without knowing every inch of it, every boundary, every registration detail. Someone had made inquiries. Someone had submitted preliminary paperwork. Someone had positioned themselves to act on my behalf. Act. The word echoed in my head as I remembered Claire asking if I had ever considered letting someone help manage things. Her gentle tone, her practiced concern. By the time I drove home that afternoon, the picture was clear enough to frighten me. The cameras were the first step. The money was the second. And the third had not happened yet. That night, Claire called. She sounded calm, warm, almost relieved. "Dad," she said, "I was thinking about you today. Have you felt any more confused lately?" I paused before answering. Let the silence stretch. "Sometimes," I admitted, "little things slip." "That happens," she said softly. "It does not mean anything bad. Just means you should not have to carry everything alone." I stared up at the ceiling as she spoke, at the place where the smoke detector watched me breathe. "I do not want to be a burden," I said. "You are not a burden," she replied quickly. "You are family." Family. When the call ended, I did not feel comforted. I felt measured, as if each response had been recorded and scored. I opened the drawer in my study and removed the last of my handwritten notes. I folded them carefully and hid them where no camera could see. They thought they were taking pieces of my life without me noticing. What they did not understand was that numbers tell stories, and once you know how to read them, lies stop being convincing. Whatever they were building toward, it was not just theft. It was transfer. And they were preparing to take everything at once. The moment you realize money is only the surface, fear takes on a different shape. I understood then that I could not handle this alone, not quietly, not safely. Whoever was orchestrating this was not improvising. They were following a sequence: surveillance, financial access, asset positioning. The next step would not involve my accounts. It would involve me. I needed someone who understood how these cases ended when no one intervened in time. I did not call from my house. 2 days later, I drove to a neighboring town and used a phone inside a small hardware store where no one knew my name. I asked for a private investigator recommended by a retired legal clerk I once worked with years ago. Her name was Evelyn Hart. We met the following afternoon in a quiet diner off the highway. Evelyn was in her early 60s, sharp-eyed, calm, the kind of woman who listened without interrupting and noticed what others missed. She ordered tea, not coffee, People who expected long conversations did that. I told her everything. The cameras, the money, my daughter, the land. I spoke slowly, carefully, sticking to facts. I did not accuse. I let the pattern speak for itself. When I finished, Evelyn sat back and folded her hands. "This is not about theft," she said. "Not really." I waited. "This is about authority. They are building a case that you are no longer capable of managing your own affairs." My throat tightened. I had thought it. Hearing it, said out loud, made it real. She explained it simply, too simply. First, they document behavior, memory lapses, confusion, inconsistency. The cameras help with that. Second, they demonstrate financial mismanagement, money moving in ways that look erratic, even if they are the ones moving it. Third, they step in as helpers, responsible adults trying to protect an aging parent. And then, she said, they introduce paperwork. Evelyn slid a folder across the table. "I need you to prepare yourself for this part." Inside was a copy of a legal filing, not finalized, but submitted. My name at the top, my signature at the bottom. I did not recognize signing it. It granted broad authority over my finances, property, and medical decisions. The designated agent was my daughter. I felt the air leave my lungs. "I never signed this." "I know," Evelyn said. "The signature is traced, carefully, probably from something informal. A card, a check, anything handwritten." I thought of a birthday card, of Claire watching me sign it, of her offering to mail it for me. "There is more," Evelyn continued. She lowered her voice. "They have contacted a residential care facility, not for immediate placement. Not yet. They are establishing a relationship, laying groundwork. They have also requested information from a medical practice about cognitive assessments." My hands curled into fists beneath the table. "They are planning to have you evaluated," she said. "Once a doctor signs off on diminished capacity, everything changes. Your objections stop carrying weight. Decisions get made for you, legally." I imagined white walls, locked doors. My land sold while I sat in a room, being told it was for my own good. "Why not just wait?" I asked, my voice unsteady. "Why rush this?" Evelyn met my eyes. "Because you are still too sharp, and sharp people notice things." I sat there, listening to the clink of dishes and the hum of conversations around us, feeling as though the world had tilted slightly off its axis. They were not trying to help me. They were trying to remove me. Evelyn closed the folder. "Here is what happens next if you do nothing." They finalize the authority documents. They schedule an assessment. They present recorded footage and financial irregularities as evidence of decline. And once the system accepts that version of you, it is very hard to undo. I swallowed. "And if I do something?" "Then we move quickly," she said. "Quietly. We document everything. We gather proof of surveillance. We trace the money. We establish intent. And we bring it to people who can act before the next step locks into place." She paused. "But you need to understand something. If your daughter is involved in this, confronting her could make her accelerate, or panic, or worse." I nodded slowly. "I am not confronting anyone." "Good," Evelyn said. "Then you do exactly what you have been doing. You let them believe the story they are writing is working." As we stood to leave, she added one final thing. "The most dangerous moment in cases like this is when the target realizes they are being erased." I drove home in silence. That night, I sat beneath the cameras and let my shoulders slump. I let my eyes wander. I repeated myself when I spoke aloud. If someone was watching, I wanted them confident. Because now I knew what they were building, and how close they were to finishing it. There is a particular kind of exhaustion that comes from pretending to be weaker than you are. Every movement had to be considered, every reaction calibrated. I could not simply act confused. I had to be confused in the right ways. Forget the right details. Remember the wrong ones. If I slipped too far in either direction, the illusion would break. Claire began visiting more often. Sometimes she arrived with groceries. Sometimes with documents she said needed organizing. Sometimes with nothing at all, just a reason to sit across from me and watch. I gave her what she wanted. I asked the same question twice in one conversation. I misplaced my glasses and searched for them while they sat plainly on the table. I told her I had not slept well because the house felt unfamiliar, as if I were staying somewhere new. Her reactions were subtle, but I saw them now. The small nods, the satisfied pauses, the way she began speaking more slowly, more carefully, as though addressing a child. "Dad," she said one afternoon, "I filled your prescription last week. Do you remember that?" I frowned. "Did you?" "Yes," she said gently. "You asked me to." I knew she was lying. I did not take that medication. I never had. But the lie was not for me. It was for the record she was building. If someone asked later, she would have examples. Proof that I forgot. Proof that she had to step in. Meanwhile, Evelyn worked quietly. She traced the shell accounts back to their source. The advisory group that did not exist on paper did exist in practice. It was tied to a consulting firm Daniel had once worked with, briefly under a different name. Same structure, same address history, same legal filings disguised through intermediaries. Claire, it turned out, was the face. Daniel was the engine. Evelyn showed me timelines, messages, financial authorizations routed through layers of separation. It was elegant in a way only long-planned betrayals ever are. There was a moment that nearly broke me. Claire sat at the kitchen table, sipping tea, and sighed. "Dad," she said, "do you ever feel scared that you might forget something important and no one would be there to help?" I looked at her and answered honestly, without breaking character. Sometimes. Her eyes softened, not with sympathy, with relief. That was when I understood the most dangerous part of what she was doing. She needed me to doubt myself. If I began to believe I was failing, I would stop resisting. I would agree to assessments. I would sign things without reading. I would accept decisions made for me because they sounded reasonable coming from someone I loved. That night, Evelyn called. "They have scheduled the evaluation," she said. 2 weeks from now." My chest tightened. "That is sooner than we expected." "They are accelerating," she continued. "Likely because your behavior is matching what they hope to see. That means we are close to the point of no return." What do we have? Enough to show financial fraud and unauthorized surveillance? Enough to establish conspiracy. But timing matters. If that evaluation happens first, they will argue everything we present is the result of your condition. I stared at the wall where the living room camera watched me sit. Then we moved faster. Evelyn hesitated. "There is something else." She explained that Daniel had recently initiated preliminary discussions with a development firm about rezoning my land. Not selling yet, just positioning. Preparing for a future where consent would not be an obstacle. They were not waiting for me to die. They were waiting for me to disappear. The next time Claire came over, she brought paperwork. Nothing official. Just forms to review. Things she said might be useful someday. I pretended to struggle reading them. I let my hands shake slightly. I let my voice crack when I asked her to explain sections I already understood. "You do not need to worry about this now," she said kindly. "I can handle it when the time comes." When the time comes. After she left, I sat alone and felt the weight of the performance settle into my bones. This was no longer about gathering proof. It was about surviving long enough to use it. And the window was closing. The night before it ended, I did not sleep at all. I sat in my chair by the front window, watching darkness press against the glass, listening to the house breathe around me. Every creak felt amplified. Every shadow carried meaning. Somewhere above my head, lenses stared down patiently, waiting to record whatever weakness I displayed next. I did not give them one. At dawn, my phone vibrated once. A single message from Evelyn. It is happening today. Stay calm. Do not change your routine. I made coffee. I burned the toast. I moved slowly, deliberately, the way I knew they expected me to move. At 8:30, Claire arrived. She looked composed, too composed. Her hair was neat, her voice gentle. She hugged me the way caregivers hug people they believe are already slipping away. "Dad," she said, "I need you to come with me today." "Where are we going?" I asked, squinting as if the answer might not hold. She hesitated just long enough to matter. "Just a short appointment, a check-in. We talked about this, remember?" I nodded vaguely. "If you say so." Her relief was visible, almost indecent. Daniel's car pulled into the driveway moments later. He stayed outside, engine running, phone pressed to his ear. He did not look at me. Claire helped me into my jacket. Her hands trembled, not with fear, with anticipation. As we stepped onto the porch, 3 unmarked vehicles turned onto the road leading to the house. Claire froze. "What is this?" she asked, her voice sharp now. The cars stopped. Doors opened. People stepped out, calm, purposeful. Evelyn walked toward us alongside 2 uniformed officers. Claire's grip tightened on my arm. "Dad," she whispered urgently, "do not say anything. You are confused. Remember that." I gently removed her hand. "No," I said quietly, "I am not." The look on her face in that moment is something I will never forget. It was not shock. It was recognition, like someone realizing too late that the ground beneath them was never solid. Daniel finally stepped forward. "This is a misunderstanding," he said quickly. "We were acting in his best interests." One of the officers raised a hand. "Sir, please step aside." Claire began talking all at once, explaining, rationalizing, rewriting the story on the fly. "He forgets things. He asked us for help. We were just protecting him. He needs care." Evelyn spoke calmly. "You installed surveillance equipment without consent. You diverted funds through unregistered entities. You forged legal documents. And you attempted to remove an adult from his home under false pretenses." Claire turned on her. "You do not understand our family." Evelyn did not flinch. "I understand patterns," she said, "and this is one of the oldest." When the officers moved to restrain her, Claire screamed. Not words at first, just sound, raw and furious. It echoed across the empty land, carrying farther than I thought it would. Then she saw me standing there, upright, steady, watching. Her voice dropped. "Dad," she said softly, "please. You know I was trying to help you." I met her eyes. "If that were true," I said, "you would not have needed cameras." The mask fell. Her face twisted into something hard and unfamiliar. "Do you know how long we have waited?" she snapped. "How much of our lives we put on hold because you refused to let go?" Daniel looked away. "You should have moved on," she continued. "You should have trusted us. Instead, you clung to everything. The house, the land, the control." I felt the words land, one by one. "You were never supposed to find out," she said. "This was supposed to be easier." That was the moment it truly ended. They took her away, still shouting, still blaming, still insisting she was right. I did not follow. I stood on my porch as the vehicles disappeared down the road, taking my daughter with them. The house was silent again. But this time, the silence felt earned. And for the first time in months, I knew the cameras were no longer watching me, because the story they were trying to tell had finally collapsed under the weight of the truth. The house felt different after they were gone. Not quieter, not lighter, just honest. For the first time in months, I walked from room to room without thinking about where I stood or how I looked. Evelyn and the officers returned later that day to remove the cameras. When the last device was taken down, she placed it gently on the table, as if it were no longer dangerous now that its purpose had been stripped away. It amazed me how small they looked once they no longer held power. The legal process moved slower than the betrayal itself, but it moved with certainty. The financial trail spoke clearly. The forged documents unraveled under scrutiny. The recordings that were meant to prove my decline instead proved intent, control, manipulation. Claire and Daniel tried to reframe everything. They said they were overwhelmed, that they feared for my safety, that they acted out of love. The court did not agree. What stayed with me most was not the verdicts or the consequences. It was the realization that the most painful losses do not come from strangers. They come from the people who know exactly where to aim. In the months that followed, I took back more than my accounts and my land. I took back my sense of self. I revised my will. I placed safeguards around everything I had built, not out of bitterness, but out of clarity. Trust, I learned, should never exist without boundaries. I still live in the same house. I still follow the routines my wife taught me. I still wake early and walk the land that carries generations of memory in its soil. But I no longer confuse love with surrender. What happened to me is not rare. It is just rarely spoken about. Too many people are quietly erased by those who claim to care for them. Too many are taught to doubt themselves instead of listening to the voice that says something is wrong. If there is one thing I know now, it is this: awareness is not paranoia, it is protection. Before I end this story, I want to leave you with the lessons it carved into my life. 5 lessons from this story. First, love does not justify control or exploitation. Second, family ties do not erase accountability. Third, silence can be a strategy when used wisely. Fourth, age does not equal weakness. Fifth, trust your instincts even when the truth hurts. This story is not about revenge. It is about survival, about dignity, about refusing to disappear quietly just because someone else decided it was convenient. If this story made you pause or reflect, I invite you to share your thoughts. What lesson did you take away from this story, and which city are you watching from right now? If you believe stories like this need to be heard, please like, share, and leave a comment. Your voice helps these stories reach the people who may need them most. Thank you for listening. Stay aware, stay grounded, and never let anyone convince you that your voice no longer matters.